possibly do. And so we're staying in here. Does that sound good? It didn't matter. If it didn't sound good, we'd still do it. And so, because that's the plan. And so we're going to keep rolling in the Gospel of Mark here and be centered on Jesus. And most of you guys, if you know me for a little bit of time, I've referenced how I'm kind of a history buff, especially when it comes to World War II, and especially Band of Brothers. I've talked about it a couple times here. How many of you guys have watched Band of Brothers? All right, that's right. I read the books, so either or. All right, it's a true story based on the 101st Airborne Division in World War II, and it chronicles their time in the war and the battles that they fought. And there's a prominent character in that book and in the series, Richard Winters, if you remember him. He starts out as a lieutenant, and on the first day of the invasion, he ends up taking control over Easy Company, because the guy who was in charge got killed within the first couple hours. And so Richard Winters is, hey, you're in charge. And he is a great leader. You see that right through the beginning stages of the war. He leads his men through many victories. And they love him. They have the utmost respect for him because he puts his life on the line constantly for his men. He's always worried about their well-being. And he was phenomenal. And he did many great things as their leader. He built the respect and love amongst the whole company. But he was so good, he got promoted a lot, which is good for him, but that also meant that he was no longer going to directly lead these men. He was in a more of a higher position overseeing things. And that left a big gap. What they found is a big gap in competency in leaders. Because they were trying to find the next guy who was going to lead this company. And there was no one really who was good. And the men were concerned because they're like, hey, we're looking for a guy who can lead us, who cares about us, but also we don't want him to make dumb decisions and get us killed. And there was one guy in particular, in the Battle of Bastogne, they get a guy named Lieutenant Dyke. He takes over, and he's horrible. He doesn't care about the guys. He's aloof. He can't make decisions well. He freezes under pressure. And in a battle to capture Foy, which is a town, he freaks out in the middle of battle. He melts down, he stops the whole advance, and they're stuck in the open field. Artillery's raining down on them, machine gun fire, guys are getting taken out left and right, and he's just frozen. And so High Command sees this, they relieve him of duty, they're like, all right, you're out. And then they send in this guy, Lieutenant Spears, if you guys remember that series. And they said, hey, Spears, you're taking over. And so he runs out to them, he finds them, and he says, hey, you're in good hands now. I'm leading you. And of course, that means nothing to the men at this point, because they're like, hey, man, we've had other guys. None of them have been good. And there's been a lot of rumors about this Spears guy, of how he treats POWs, that he did not good things. Or that if guys went against his command, he would do some harsh things. And so they're like, I don't know if I can trust you, even though this guy is saying, hey, you're in good hands. And so what ended up happening is that during this battle, is their radio comms went down, and there was another coordinating attack on the other side, but they couldn't communicate. And that could result in casualties on their own people. And so they're like, well, how are we going to communicate with this other team? And Spears says, I'm going to do it. They're like, well, how are you going to do this? He said, I'm going to go run over there and talk to them. And they're like, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a whole German force in between us right now. And he's like, yeah. And so he gets up and he runs across the battlefield. People are shooting at him all over the place. And his own guys are like, what is this guy? They just see one guy running out. The Germans stopped shooting at him, because they were surprised. They couldn't believe it. There's this guy just running across the open field. No care. And he makes it to the other side. And then he communicates what's going on to the division over there. And then he came back. And everyone's just like, he's coming back. I can't believe it. And he comes back to his guys like, all right, they know what they're doing. Here's what we're doing. And then they go and they capture the town. But from that day on, the men in that company, their lives are changed. And they were saying, who is this man? Who is this man who said we're in good hands and then went into the fire, went into the enemy territory to save us? And they knew, we have our leader. We can trust this guy. And I say this because this is pretty much where we're at in the life of Jesus. This is where we're headed. Is that up until this point last week, we saw that Jesus has now started talking about the kingdom of God. And he's using parables, right? We talked about the parables last week. That's what he used to help teach spiritual truths so people could understand, or for those who were there not for the right reasons, that they would just turn it off. But within his teaching of the kingdom, though, there was a little bit of confusion, because what he was teaching wasn't what everyone expected. People had their own ideas of what the Messiah was going to do, of what the kingdom of God was going to be like. And Jesus comes on the scene and he's saying, hey, your expectations of what the Messiah is supposed to do, that's not what I'm here for. And everything he does and says is against what their expectations were. We see that Jesus, how did he show up? The most humble of circumstances. As a defenseless baby, born in Bethlehem, which was a know-nothing town. The son of just a carpenter who was a nobody. That's how the Messiah entered into the world. That's not what they were expecting. And there was no army. He didn't form a military coup. And then he goes on to say, you know what the kingdom of God is like? It's like a tiny little mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds. And people began to doubt. People began to get confused because they're like, well, that's not the kingdom we were looking for. That's not the Messiah that we were looking for. They had expectations of a guy coming in, got his forces, got his army, and they're going to overthrow Rome. And they're going to put the physical kingdom of Israel back on top. That's what they were expecting. So as a result, people started getting confused about Jesus, and eventually some people started falling away from him. And we see that actually in the Gospel of John in chapter 6. Again, we always see there's big crowds of people with Jesus. But then eventually Jesus sees that in John 6, and he's like, all right, it's time to weed through people here. And he starts saying, hey, what does it mean to follow him? And he says some really hard, confusing things. He said, hey, if you want to follow me and be one of my people, you need to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And people are like, what? And he didn't explain what that meant. He just dropped that line. And people are like, this guy's crazy. No, I'm out. We're out of here. And then a ton of people, most of them leave. Because they're like, all right, he's not what we're expecting. He's not doing what we want. And so we're out of here. And today, Jesus still goes against many of our expectations. He does. It still happens. If we're going to be honest today, we have all had expectations of Jesus, our own presuppositions of who he is and what he's supposed to do. And if we're going to be even more honest, we all still have some. We do. We all have our own expectations. Maybe it's, well, he's always going to answer my prayers with a yes. That's what Jesus does. Is he will always answer what I'm asking for. That's what I expect of Jesus. Or he's going to bless me the way that I want to be blessed. Because he does promise blessings to his people. But here's the thing. It's not always the way you want to be blessed. But you think, no, he'll do it the way that I want him to do it. Or, Jesus will never give me more in life than I can handle. Here's the thing. He will. That's not a Bible verse where it says God will never give you more than you can handle. That's not in Scripture. That's false. He gives you way more than you can handle, but he promises to be with you in it. That's his promise. Or we think, well, Jesus interprets the Bible, and he agrees with how I interpret the Bible. No, he doesn't. We agree and interpret the Bible the way Jesus reads and interprets the Bible. We have to turn and change our expectations. And so when Jesus begins to act differently from what we expect, it shakes us. It makes us a little nervous. It's unsettling. It's startling. Because when Jesus does that, we begin to see him as King Jesus, as all authority Jesus, as the Jesus who's in control, as a Jesus who doesn't march to the beat of our own drum. And that starts to freak us out. Because then we begin to realize, wait a minute, we're not in control. And you begin to see as Jesus goes through his ministry, what he is demanding is full allegiance and commitment to him. He says, if you want to follow me, this isn't just 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You want to follow me, it is your full allegiance, your whole life that you are giving to me, which quite honestly is a big ask. It is. That's a really big ask. And this is pretty early on in his ministry, right? He only had a ministry of 3.5 years. And this is kind of in the first half we're still in. And he's asking a big commitment. This would be like if you went on a first date or first few dates with someone, things are going well, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, I love you, but I need your full commitment to me right now and enter into a covenant all in. You'd be like, red flag. This is a little too intense right now. I'm not ready for all that. But that's essentially what's happening. Jesus is saying, if you want to be with me, I need your full life. I need full commitment. Which then that brings us to a natural question. If that's what he is asking of us, if that's what his expectation is, a natural question can I trust Jesus then? If he is demanding my life and my full allegiance and my commitment, can I trust him with that? That's a logical question. We ask this of our closest relationships, especially with a spouse. When you're looking to get married, connect your life with someone, you want to know that you can trust them. That's essentially what marriage is I am trusting myself to you. or even close friendships. There's a level of trust underneath that, or a mentor. You need to have trust, right? If you want intimacy in a relationship, there is a level of trust that is needed. And so as we enter into a relationship with Jesus, that's the question, or you're considering who he is. You want to know, can I trust him? And so in our passages today, we're going to see Jesus show us why we can trust him. We're going to see that. And so we're going to cover a big section today, the end of chapter 4 and all of chapter 5, and we're going to look at three main areas. Right? We're going to see Jesus' power, we're going to see his purposes, and we're going to see his priority. And we're going to see, when we see all those combined, that he is someone who we can trust. So we're going to be in verse 35 in chapter 4 to start. On that day, when evening came, he said to them, let us go over to the other side. Now, this is still a continuation of what we talked about last week, right? He just said all the parables, and in his time with his disciples, explaining the parables, and then we're going right into the next thing, right? This is right after each other. Verse 36. Leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, right? So there's a big storm, it's scary, and Jesus is taking a little nap. Right? It's a little weird. And we're going to see it's a little weird, and the disciples don't understand that. And they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Do you not care? Now, remember, some of the disciples are seasoned fishermen. They've been on this water before. They've been in storms. They know what storms are like. Yet this storm's got them so scared that they're thinking they're going to die, which means this is a bad storm. This isn't just like some wind. This is, we're going to die. It's a scary storm that's freaking them out. Yet, what is Jesus doing? He's taking a little power nap. He's nestled in the corner. He's got a cushion. He's sleeping peacefully while they're about to die. And it freaks them out. And notice in their question to him, there's something that they're certain about, and there's something that they're uncertain about. What are they certain about? They say, we are perishing. It's certain that we are going to die. That's what they're certain about. It's fear. The fear is certain. That there's no way we're getting out of this alive. That is a fact. What are they uncertain about? They say, Jesus, do you even care? What they're uncertain about is, Jesus, do you even care about what we're going through right now? That's what they're unclear about. And so you see those two things here in this question. Now, for many people in this room, you guys have been here. You've experienced this. You know what this is like. Or maybe you're here right now. Maybe this is where you are. Is that as you're looking at your life, you're seeing everything's kind of getting chaotic. Everything's getting out of control. You're trying to just grab onto something to anchor yourself. You're just trying to find some footing, and it's like, man, there's no way out of this. We are done. Maybe it was a medical diagnosis. I can't help this. Or financial struggle. Or maybe your family's falling apart, and it's just not, there's no way this is going to get held together. There's no hope for this. And that fear that you're feeling is certain. You know it's there. You feel it. And then what's uncertain is, Jesus, do you even care about what I'm going through? Because right now, Jesus, it feels like you're asleep on a cushion. It feels like you're not even around or cognizant of what I'm going through. Why are you taking a nap while my life is falling apart? While my fear is certain? While there seems to be no hope? And ultimately what that is, it's you're questioning his love. Which is, again, we've all done this. Right? If we felt this way, you're a normal human being if you felt this way. But that's what it is. You're questioning, Jesus, do you see this? Do you care? And we're going to see his response in verse 39. And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, hush, be still. And the wind died down and it became perfectly calm. Basically, so what's happening, wind's going everywhere, it's crazy, it's scary. They're like, Jesus, wake up! Do you not care? We're dying. And he's like, I can see him like, oh, what is going on, guys? Like, what's up? And he's like, oh, this is some breeze. And so he walks out and he's like, hey, be quiet, stay quiet. All right, we're done. And then it happens. He's just told weather, calm down. And it did, right? And he used two different tenses here. Right? The first word he uses is in the present tense, which means, yeah, we're calm down right now. The second term is in the perfect tense, meaning that it carried into the future. So this wasn't like he said, hey, calm down, and then it took like 20 minutes for the storm to settle. It was instant, and it stayed that way as soon as he said it. That's some powerful stuff. That's next level. Because remember, this is weather that he's talking to. We've seen him command spiritual forces, which, spiritual forces can communicate and they understand what Jesus is saying. We've seen him command diseases and sicknesses, but this is weather. Weather's not a living thing. It's not a being. It's a force. And it listens to him immediately, which is crazy because throughout human history, weather has always been seen as a force that's uncontrollable. There's nothing we can do about it. We don't control weather, right? Weather does something and we respond to weather. It's not the opposite. There's nothing we can do about weather. I mean, you see this all through human history, right? You have Napoleon in the French Empire when it was at its height. He had the best military in the world because he had the big artillery guns, right? And so how did he lose the Battle of Waterloo? What was it? It was a big battle. What cost him it? Was it the enemy? It was rain. There was so much rain that the guns got stuck in the mud. Couldn't go to the battle, and he lost. And they were never the same. The Spanish Armada was the greatest fleet ever assembled at that time. They were the power of the world. What took them out? A hurricane. Wiped them out. They never were the same. The D-Day invasion in World War II is still to this day the largest invading military fleet ever assembled. The biggest operation ever put together. Do you know what kept delaying it over and over and over? Was it the enemy cut off supplies? Were they putting up a good fight? No, it was fog. Fog is what almost crippled the entire thing and kept pushing it more and more and more. Little fog. Because that shows you we can't control weather. No matter how much power we have, we can't control it. Yet Jesus just told it to be quiet and stay quiet, and it did. This is huge. He just commanded weather. And then we're going to see the disciples' response in verse 40. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" He's like, "Do you not know who I am? Have you not seen the things that I do? Where's your faith?" And they became very much afraid. Which, note, the storm's gone. It's completely gone. And it says they're still very much afraid now. Why? Because they just saw Jesus do something crazy, and it scares them. His show of power actually scared them. And they said to one another, "Who then is this?" Other translations say, "Who is this man? Who is this man that even the wind and the sea obey him?" And that section ends. It ends on a question. Why end on a question? Because it's meant to make us ask that question and consider the answer. That's how Mark writes. That's what he does. He's meant to draw you into the story. So that as we read this, we're like, yeah, you know what? That's a good question. Who is he? Who is Jesus? That kind of power demands an answer to that question that we need to know. And so for his disciples, right, this is a pretty big moment for them. It's a big revelation because all through the Old Testament, the Jewish people knew there's a Messiah coming. They understood that. They knew he was going to be there. At this point, his disciples were like, okay, Jesus is definitely the Messiah. They had that level of understanding. But they still didn't know fully who the Messiah was. Like, they knew it was Jesus, but they hadn't fully put together yet that he was the Son of God, that he is deity, that he is God. We're going to see in a couple chapters they eventually get to that point with Peter's proclamation, but they're still trying to figure that out. Because in the Old Testament, you see clearly there's only one person who can control the seas, who can control weather, and it's God. Psalm 89 verse 9 says this, "You rule the swelling of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them." That "you" is God. And there's many other verses in the Old Testament, whereas the only one who can control weather is God himself. So when Jesus is in the boat, he wakes up and he speaks to weather and it listens. The disciples are now coming to realize, oh, this Messiah is not just a great guy. This Messiah is not just a powerful man. This Messiah is not just some anointed one. The Messiah, Jesus, is God himself. That's what they begin seeing. Because he's commanding nature. And it scares them. It scares them. Notice how their first response wasn't worship. Their first response when they saw him do this was they were very much afraid. They were very much afraid. Why? Because think about it, this storm was going to end their life. That's the scariest thing, right? Death. Like that's what was going to end their life. Think about your most uncontrollable circumstance you ever run into in life. That's scary. What's scarier than all of that, though, is the one who can control those things. They just saw Jesus control the thing that could kill them. And they realized he's in our boat. The guy who controls the thing that was about to kill us is in our boat. And they're like, whoa. And they're freaked out. Because the one who controls the storms that can take us out, the one who can do that is Jesus Christ. And when we begin to realize that, we're like, wait a minute. We need to reevaluate some things here. But this is meant to give us hope. This is meant to give us hope. And so we see here that Jesus can control everything that controls you. Whatever it is in life that's dominating you, whatever your circumstances you have in life that are dominating you, Jesus dominates that. So it may be too powerful for you, but it's not too powerful for him. And so this is meant to give us hope, to say that, hey, Jesus is in control. And he's in control whether you recognize it or not. You may not think he is, doesn't change the fact that he is King of Kings. He is Lord of Lords, and he is the one who's in control. And that's scary for a lot of people, because many people in this room, it's normal. Like, you've been hurt by people who have power over you, whether it's in work and relationships or whatever it is. Like, you've been hurt by people in positions of authority. And so that when you're starting to hear, hey, Jesus has ultimate authority, has this kind of power, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. I don't like that, because we like being in control. We get some sort of comfort knowing we're in control of things, even though in reality, we don't really have much control in our lives, right? You may be able to pick your cereal in the morning. That's about the extent of the control that you have. And even then, if the economy goes to shambles, you might not. You might not have control over what cereal you have. Right? I hated group projects in high school and in college. Hated them. Do you know why? Because in a group project, what do you have to do? You got to trust that other people are going to do their part, that you can't be in control of everything. And I hate that, because I want to be in control, because I know how it's happening. I know what's going to go on. I know I'm going to bring a certain level to this. And now in a group project, I have to trust that so-and-so is going to do it. I hate that. I want full control. When we begin to realize that we're not in full control of things, but ultimately that someone else is, and that someone is Jesus, that can be scary. But it's scary only if you don't know the person who has the power. Because that's as we're reading this now. As we see the power Jesus displays, the question that pops up next is, okay, he has all power, but how can I trust him? How can I trust that he's going to use this power? What's his purpose for all of his power? And how does that work with me? He's all powerful, but what is he going to do with that? And that's what we're going to see in the next account in Mark chapter 5. In verse 1, it says this: they came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes, and when he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. Right? So this is continuing right into the next thing. It's boom, boom, boom. So they just got cleared out of the storm. They're probably like, whoa, that was nuts. Did you see the storm? Yeah, it was crazy. He spoke and it went away. That's crazy. They land and they're like, that's the craziest thing we're going to see today, right? And then all of a sudden it says a demon-possessed guy just starts running up to them. Now other gospels also say that he was butt naked. And so they land, and all of a sudden they're like, man, that was wild. And all of a sudden a butt-naked guy runs at them, probably screaming, and he's possessed by demons. What a day. You follow Jesus, you're in for a wild ride, right? That's what we're seeing here. And so this guy starts running up to them. And that word unclean that we see here, right, because we know he's possessed, but that word unclean means to be defiled or violated, right? Meaning that this guy got into some things that messed with him. They violated his soul. They violated him. And then we get a description as to how violated he has become because of these things. And we're going to get that in verse 3. And he had his dwelling among the tombs, right? So he's surrounded by dead things. And no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. And no one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains and gashing himself with stones. And here, what we're seeing is pretty much the devastation of sin, right? On the big picture, this is what sin does. But we're also getting a picture of really what's true of all humanity. That all of us, we're born into sin, and then we do sin. And so we are all condemned by sin. And because of our sin, we're separated from God, separated from life. So we have physical death, but we're also spiritually dead. We're literally surrounded by death. surrounded by dead things. And then what we do is we go through life trying to find purpose, trying to find power, love, comfort, peace, and we're going to all these other things in life to find it. Whether it's your career, it's money, it's relationships, it's substances, whatever it is, we're all searching for something to find these things, but the problem is they don't bring life because they're not alive. It's death. But you keep going to these things. Well, if I just get enough money here or esteem here, then I'll feel more important, or people will like me more. They'll see more value in who I am, or I can get these things that help me feel better about myself, or I'll have a purpose that maybe I can get up in the morning, but they never fulfill. It's surrounded by death, and then those things end up controlling you. That's what happened to this man. At some point, they were able to contain him with chains, but it got so bad that no one could keep him down, that the things he got involved in that he thought he had control over ended up controlling him. That's what happens. You see that happen with money all the time. Well, if I just make some more money, I'll be good, right? I control it, and then what happens is that greed controls you, and that drives everything that you do in life. We see this with addictions and substances. Well, I got it in control. I just go to it here and there. What always ends up happening? It ends up destroying. It ends up binding you. And then it leads to your self-destruction, which we see the man is cutting himself with stones. All of those things will lead to destruction. And then for some of you in here, this might even hit deeper. This man got involved in some things, some dark things, and maybe you, in some point in life, hey, I want to know some knowledge about these things. I want to dive in. And the spiritual forces are real, right? Angels and demons are real. Their dark arts are real. Those are a thing not to be messed with. And maybe you got involved in that stuff. And what started out as a curiosity, or maybe I just want a little power here, ended up taking you over completely. And you're like this man, screaming in agony, shackled by it, thinking that there's no way out. And so the question here is now, what's Jesus going to do? This guy just showed up to Jesus. We know Jesus has power. So what's Jesus going to do to this man? How is he going to respond to this? And this is where many people begin to see, well, obviously, this is where Jesus drops the hammer. Punishment, judgment. And this is what I hear all the time. Many people have this view of God. They tell me, I can't go into a church or God's going to strike me with lightning. And I'm like, we got ceilings. You're all good. It's not going to happen. Or I'm going to go in and he's just going to burn me. I'm just going to light up in flames. Like, no, what are you talking about? But that's how people view God. Well, I'm a mess, and he's powerful, and so he's just going to drop the hammer on me. So what's Jesus going to do? And what we see is that Jesus is going to use his power to set this man free. He's going to use his power to not destroy this man, but to free him and to give him life. That is his purpose with his power. That's an amen moment, is that he uses his power to free us and to bring us life, not to crush us. And what's cool is in this account, it's not even much of a fight. It's not like all of a sudden like Jesus rolls up and all the demons are like, let's go. And Jesus is like, bring it on. It's a titanic struggle. No, they're not on the same playing field. They see Jesus and they're like, dang, we lost. They knew it was over at this point. And we see Jesus, he's using his power. His power serves his love. And he frees this man from an entire legion of demons. We find out it's not just one demon, it's a legion, many demons that were possessing this man. And so what happened, I'll just summarize kind of what happens here is, so the man runs to him, and the demons recognize Jesus, because all through Mark we see this, that the demons know who Jesus is. Even when the people don't know who Jesus is, the demons know. And they say, hey, Jesus is you, the Most High Son of God. They got that right. They know him. And they know they're about to get cast out. They know they lost, because Jesus is more powerful, way more powerful. And so they say, hey, before you do this, we just got one request. One request. We don't want to just be cast out and have nowhere to go. We want to go somewhere. Because we do see a thing in Scripture, there does seem to be with demons, they get very uncomfortable if they're not in a body and possessed. They're irritated. Beyond that, we don't know why. The Bible doesn't explain it. It just seems to be a thing, right? And many people have conjectures or written books on it. The reality is we don't really know for sure why. It's just the Bible doesn't explain it. And so they're like, can we go in the pigs? And Jesus is like, fine, go in the pigs. And so they leave the man, they go into the pigs, they send 2,000 pigs over the ledge, and they drown in the water. which obviously rifled up the town. They freaked out because that was a big part of their economy that is now dead. And I think Jesus did that. There's conjecture on it. I think he did it to stir up commotion in the town so that they would all show up and see Jesus, and then they'd be introduced. Because at this point, he is in Gentile territory, not Jewish territory. And so he's trying to let the Gentiles know who he is and the power that he has. So I think he used it as kind of almost like a marketing ploy to get people to come to see him and learn about him. And so that happens. But in that story, you see that combination of Jesus' power and his love coming together. That he has power over these forces, over reality. But he uses it out of love. And this is what we like to see in our fathers. And I understand not all of us have had great experiences of family growing up, and I'm sensitive to that. I recognize that. The good news is you have a heavenly Father who's way better. And you can find rest and comfort in him no matter what your family situation was. But for those of you who grew up with a dad, a good father, how did you look up to him? That's my Superman. Yeah, but no one could beat up my dad. My dad's the strongest. My dad's the best. You can't mess with my dad. But then when he came home from work, what did he do? He'd give you a hug. He'd wrestle around with you. He'd give you a kiss. He'd hang out with you. He'd tuck you in a bed at night. This guy you see is Superman who loves you. And he uses that power to love you and to protect you, to provide for you. That's why I think God he refers to himself as Father throughout Scripture, because he's trying to evoke that image. That he is all-powerful, but he uses that power to love his kids, to protect his kids. Right? This is Liam Neeson in Taken. This is what it is. Right? His daughter gets kidnapped. He calls them up. He's like, I'm a man with a very particular set of skills. I will find you and I will kill you. And he does that. He's a man of his word. He goes to Eastern Europe and he sets it ablaze. Talk about power and strength. He takes out half of Albania. But then what happens when he finds his daughter? He runs up to her. He gives her a big hug. And he starts crying. And he says, I'm here. I'm here. This man who showed all power and strength. Yet when he finds his daughter, it's love. He used all of his power to find her, to free her, and to protect her. That's our God. That's what he's done for us. And there's a peace in knowing that what dominates you can't dominate your dad. And no matter how big and scary it is, it's not too big and scary for God. And we can run to God like a small child runs to their dad. That's what we see in Romans 8, verse 15. For you have not received a spirit of slavery, leading to fear again, but you've received a spirit of adoption as sons, by which we cry out, Abba, Father. That word Abba literally translated means daddy. Like, that's the kind of relationship we have. We can go to God and be like, Dad, help! Dad, I need you! We have that kind of connection with him. Hebrews 4, verse 16. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace. How do we go to the throne of God? How can we approach it? Do we approach it with anxiety? Do we approach it with fear? Do we approach it with our head down? No, we approach with confidence. To God, to his throne, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. That's how we can appear before the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the one who created the universe. We don't have to go in fear. We go in confidence that we're his. Because through Jesus, we can now approach God as a child approaches their father. In this time, with kings in ancient times, to get an audience with the king, you had to go through a lot of steps. Right? You had to go through a bunch of levels of bureaucracy, red tape, all that stuff to just get an okay to go before the king. And then when you came there was a whole, you had to do a certain amount of bows on the way. You couldn't cross this line. There was rules just to get an audience with the king. Except for one group of people. Didn't have to. They had unlimited access no matter when. Do you know who it was? The king's kids. They didn't need to go through that. At any time, they could run in and go sit in dad's lap. That's what we have. We don't need to go through red tape or processes. We have full access to the king. And so are there scary things in this world? Yes. Are there things more powerful than you in this world? Absolutely. We're dealing with all that. But your dad dominates those scary and powerful things. And he holds you in his hands. And we're going to see the results of this change in this man's life. Verse 15. They, being the town, because they're like, where'd our pigs go? Right? So they're flocking there. They came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed sitting down, clothed and in his right mind. The very man who had had the legion, and they became frightened. Brian talked about this a couple weeks ago. What scared them? That Jesus helped the guy. They're like, wait, we weren't scared of him when he was demon-possessed, but now we're scared that he's fixed. They were freaked out because they were like, that's a level of power we've never seen. We knew who this guy was, and that's the power of Jesus. That's what he does here. Many of you have experienced this, not demon possession, right? But you've experienced the life change. You know who you were before Jesus. You know what you were doing. You know the situation you were in. And then you met Jesus and he came into your life. And then you see the change that happens. And you're just like this man, where he was naked and he was crazed and he was in bondage. And what do we see now? He is fully clothed in his right mind, sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening to his words. That's the power of him. But notice how it freaked people out. You guys also experienced this. How people, they see the change in your life and they're like, what, did you join a cult? It's like, I like when you got hammered on the weekends and just did whatever you wanted. This is scary. And you got pushback from your friends, from your family. They don't want to hear about it. And that's what happens here, verse 16. Those who had seen it described to them how it had happened to the demon-possessed man and all about the swine. And they began to implore him to leave the region. They're like, Jesus, you got to go. This is way too big. I don't understand what's happening here. I don't understand this level of power. It's freaking me out. Jesus, leave. And they kicked Jesus out. They're amazed at the power it took to change the man because they remembered who he was. They saw the change, but they freaked him out and they wanted Jesus gone. Some of you have experienced that pushback. I read in a commentary as I was preparing for this, there's a great sentence in here that describes this, and it says this: now the people begged Jesus to leave. They had driven the possessed man out of the town, forcing him to live among the tombs, but they are more comfortable with the evil they know than the power they can't control. That's a line. They were more comfortable with the evil that they know. That, hey, yeah, this man's destructive. He's got bad things going on. They were more comfortable with that than with seeing Jesus change his life. Because they're like, we don't know that kind of power. That's crazy. Is that you can be more comfortable with where this man was before he came to know Jesus and after. That's the human state. Because again, if power like that without knowing the person's purpose is terrifying, right? We see this in Peter. In one of his first interactions with Jesus in the Gospel of Luke, right? He's fishing all night, can't find anything. Jesus shows up. He's like, well, did you try the other side? And Peter's like, did I try the other side? Are you serious? You know what? I'll humor you. Sure, I'll try the other side. Tries the other side, fish for days. And Peter freaks out. And he throws himself down at Jesus' feet. And this is what he says: go away from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man. I don't get this power. You're way beyond me. Just get away. I'm not worthy. Get away. We see Peter does that. But then Jesus, as he always does, he shows us that we can trust the one who wields his power, because this one uses it for our good. And that's what he responds to Peter, and he says this: do not fear. So you don't need to be scared. There's no need to fear. And then he says, for now, you will be catching men. He's like, I'm changing your whole life. You were catching fish. Now you're going to catch people. You're going to share the gospel. He says, don't fear. I'm here to change you now. He uses his power to change our lives, to free us. And that's what happens with this man. All right, I'll summarize what happens there. But Jesus is about to move on. He's like, all right, got to keep the ministry moving. And this guy's like, Jesus, I'm going to come with you. And Jesus tells him no. He's like, no, you're not coming with me. So you're actually going to stay here. And what I want you to do is go to all the towns in this area. Again, this is a Gentile area, not Jewish. He said, but I want you to go all through the town and tell them about me. Because they're going to know who he was. And they're going to see a difference. They're going to be like, wait, what? So he makes him a missionary. And what's crazy is a couple chapters later, Jesus will come back here for the second of the miraculous feedings. And there's thousands of people waiting for him. Where do you think those thousands came from? This guy. Going to all the towns. Saying, there's this guy who healed me. He changed me. And so when Jesus shows up, they all want to know who he is. He became a missionary. His whole purpose changed. And so what you see is that Jesus turns victims of destruction into victors who bring life. That's what he does. And so you're not too far gone. I don't know what it is. Maybe, Aaron, you don't know what I've done. You don't know what I've said. I don't care. You're not too far gone. This man was possessed by thousands, probably, demons. And Jesus saved him. You're not too far gone. And then some of you hear this and you're like, well, that's cool and all. He has the power. His purpose is to use it for my good. Cool. But why is my issue not fixed yet? So then where's my answer to prayer? How come I'm still waiting? How come I'm still struggling? If he's so powerful and he wants to use it to free me, why am I not freed? Why am I still here? What's up with that? And we're going to see lastly what his priority is. Verse 21. When Jesus had crossed over again in the boat, so again, we're still continuing. This is all just boom, boom, boom. When he had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and so he stayed by the seashore. One of the synagogue officials, named Jairus, came up and on seeing him, fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will get well and live." Right? So they land, and another thing happens right away. This guy Jairus shows up. He's a synagogue leader, and it's one of the most heartbreaking moments any parent could experience. He says, my daughter is dying. And as a parent, that's your worst fear. This is heartbreaking. And he's like, Jesus, I need your help. And so we see a level of faith in this man, right? He knows that Jesus can do something. He believes that Jesus has the power to do it, which is a good thing. Verse 24. And he went off with them, and a large crowd was following him and pressing in on him. Now, Mark's mentioning that, again, we always know there's a crowd with Jesus, but he's mentioning specifically that they're really crowded him, because we're going to see why in the next couple of verses. But he's packed. Right? People are shoulder to shoulder with him there. And at this point, it seems like we know what's going to happen. All right, Jesus has his story. Here, there's a sick girl. He's going to go. He's going to heal her. We got the gist of it. Kind of like in Lord of the Rings. Here we go. Right? So in Lord of the Rings, there's a bad guy with a powerful ring. In order to beat the bad guy, you got to destroy the ring. So the good guys find the ring, and they're like, we're going to go destroy it. And you're like, all right, I got it. I know the mission. They're going to bring the ring to Mount Doom and destroy it. Bad guy. We know the mission. I got the gist of it. That's what we're thinking here. All right, Jesus has his mission. I got the story. And then out of nowhere, Mark pulls a detour and starts talking about something completely different. And we're going to see that in verse 25. A woman who had hemorrhage for 12 years and had endured much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse. After hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak, for she thought, if I just touch his garments, I will get well. Right? Now, what is that? That's faith right there. She's like, all I got to do is just touch his cloak, and I'm going to be healed. Right? So she's exuding faith just like Jairus did. Now, I have an entire sermon that I've done on this passage. I'm not going into it right now for your sake, right? Because that's not the message. So I'm not going to go into all the details here. It's a beautiful story. It's a beautiful sermon. But we're just going to do an overview. But a question arises as you're reading this. What on earth does this have to do with Jairus' daughter? Why all of a sudden are we talking about this lady who has a bleeding issue? There's a girl who's dying. Jesus, you need to hurry this up. This lady's dealt with this for 12 years. She can wait a couple hours more. This girl's dying. Come on, Jesus, this is time sensitive. Next verse. Immediately, the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Immediately Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing in on you? And you say, who touched me? Right? They got a little sarcastic with Jesus there. And he looked around to see the woman who had done this. So she touches the cloak. She's healed immediately. She knows it. It says that Jesus recognized that he felt power go from him. What all that means, again, there's conjecture. We don't fully know. We just know it happened. And all of a sudden, Jesus stops. And he's like, hold up. Who touched me? And his disciples are like, are you serious, dude? Everyone's touching you right now. You're literally bumping into people. What do you mean, who touched you? We're all touching you right now. He's like, nope. This is different. Someone touched me and someone was healed. I felt power leave. We're not going anywhere until I find this person. Now, what do you do if you're Jairus? Your little girl's waiting. She's dying. And then Jesus just stops everything and he's like, yeah, no, we're not moving until the person who got healed comes forward. If you're Jairus, that's a little tough. You're kind of like, hey, Jesus, can we move on from this? A little girl's dying. And if we're going to be honest, this is where many people have been in this room. This is where many are right now. They were saying, hey, Jesus, where are you? What's taking so long? And you're seeing other people be blessed. You're seeing other people be healed. And your situation's not getting better. And you're like, hey, why them and why not me? How come they're getting blessed? How come their prayers are getting answered, and yet I'm still struggling? Jesus, where are you? That's just real. That's real life. How come you're not helping me, but you're helping someone else? And then Jesus is about to show his ultimate priority and what matters to him most. Verse 33. But the woman, fearing and trembling, why is she scared? One, a miracle just occurred. She's healed, and she's like, what just happened? But also, this Jesus guy is now saying, front and center. And she's like, is he mad? Is he angry? I don't know. So she's scared. Aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, again, there's a lot we could go into this. This is beautiful. We just don't have time to right now. But he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Jesus wanted her to know something. He wanted her to be certain of something here. He wanted her to know why she was healed. He didn't want her to attribute it to some mysticism. He didn't want her to attribute it to like, oh, it was something she did, that she had to fight through the crowd and it was her effort that got her healed. He didn't want her to think it was some vague spiritualism. He wanted her to know what healed her. And what was it? What healed her? He says he wanted her to know that it was her faith in him that healed her. It's like, daughter, what healed you was you put your faith in me. Because that's always Jesus' priority. And he wasn't just talking about physical healing, because at this time, this bleeding issue, most commentators think it was related to a woman's monthly cycle that just never stopped. And so because of that, in Jewish law, you were unclean during that cycle, but if it never stopped, that means you were always unclean. And so she could never go to the temple. She could never go to the synagogue, could never worship God. She was spiritually disconnected as a result. And so this wasn't just a physical healing. She was also spiritually healed. That's why he mentions, so she was already healed, but he says, hey, your faith has made you well, now be healed of your affliction, because he's talking about a deeper healing that's happening there. It's a spiritual healing. But it was the faith in him that healed her, and that's what he wanted her to know. So yes, Jesus has the power to handle your problems. He does, absolutely. He can do that. It's not a problem. It's not a problem for him. And yes, his purpose is to set you free and to give you life. But his priority, what he prioritizes, is you putting your faith in him. Is, do you trust him? That's his priority. That's what he wants to see. His priority, and this is tough to hear, his priority isn't to handle all your problems. It's not. That's not his priority. That's not what he's here to do, is to fix every situation. He can. But his priority is he wants to know, do you trust him with your whole life? Even in the hard moments. Even when it seems like there's no hope. He says, do you trust me? Because you know what happens? Jairus' daughter dies. She dies. Verse 35. While he was still speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue official saying, your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher anymore? But Jesus, overhearing what was being spoken, said to the synagogue official, do not be afraid any longer. Only believe. Like, if I'm Jairus, I hear that. Hey, don't be afraid, just believe, buddy. My daughter died. Are you serious? Are you for real, Jesus? Don't be afraid, just believe. She died because you took your sweet time. Because you decided to help someone else and not me. And you're telling me not to be afraid? You're telling me to believe? Who are you? But what was Jesus doing here? He's asking for more faith from Jairus. Because Jairus had some. But he's saying, I want to see, even when there's no hope, when you have no hope, when you're in the darkest place you've ever been, do you still trust me? Do you trust me? That's what he's getting at. And that's the same question for you and I this morning on December 1st, 2024. Is when you have little to no hope in life. He wants to know, do you still trust me? Some of you, you have very little. Your family's on the brink. You don't know how you're going to put food on the table. I don't know what it is. Your situation is dire. And some of you have no hope. You lost that spouse. Some of your addictions have won. They've taken you over. Some of you, I don't even know if I want to wake up tomorrow. Your hope is gone. And Jesus is asking, do you trust me? Even when it's completely dark. Even when there's no hope. Because again, he never promises that he's going to help us with the problems the way we want him to help. But he has promised eternal life and an unfailing kingdom for those who trust in him. He has promised that, and that's way better than whatever problem we're going through. No matter how painful, he says, I'm giving you a new life. I'm offering you a kingdom that can't be taken away. I'm offering you an eternity. I came to solve the bigger problem of sin and death, because that's the reality. We're all enslaved to sin naturally. We're born in sin and we do sin. And he says, death is our end. And he came to deal with the bigger problem. So yeah, what we're going through internally and externally is hard and it hurts, but no, what he has offered is even better than that, because he came to deal with the deeper issue. And he did that on the cross. He did that with his resurrection. And so you may have an expectation of how you want Jesus to fix something and when you want him to fix something, but just know he's saying here, my way is better than your way. What I'm doing is better than what you ever expected. And that's what we've seen all through today. Look at the disciples in the boat. They wanted safety from the storm. Yet it was in the storm that they saw Jesus display a power that they've never seen before, but they still had to go through it. They still had to go through that fear. You see the demon-possessed man. I wanted a reprieve from all this. Jesus didn't just give him that. Jesus then made him completely whole and then made him a missionary. Changed his whole purpose. It's better. The woman just wanted physical healing. What did he give her? I'll give you physical healing and spiritual healing, and you get an audience with the king, and you get to hear the king call her daughter. That's better. And Jairus just wanted his daughter healed. And then he's going to see Jesus raise her from the dead. That's better. When you trust Jesus, you get what you need, not necessarily what you want. And we're going to read the last part here, and then we're done. And he allowed no one to accompany him except Peter and James and John and the brother of James. They came to the house of the synagogue official, and he saw a commotion and people loudly weeping and wailing. And entering in, he said to them, "Why make a commotion and weep? The child has not died, but is asleep." And they began laughing at him. But putting them all out, he took along the child's father and mother and his own companions and entered the room where the child was. Taking the child by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha kum." That's in Aramaic, not Hebrew. That's why it's there. Mark was writing to a Gentile audience, probably the Romans. And so he just wanted to know what Jesus said in Aramaic, and then he explains it, which translated means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl got up and began to walk, for she was 12 years old. And immediately they were completely astounded, which I bet they were. That usually happens if someone comes back from the dead, right? You're going to be a little shocked. That's what happened. And he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this, and he said that something should be given her to eat, right? Jesus commonly in this time, if he did a big miracle, he's like, don't tell anyone about this, because people didn't fully know what he was really there to do. They were expecting a military overthrow, and he didn't want things to get blown out of control. And so he's like, hey, let's keep this on the hush. And but he heals her, and she's fully restored. And so I just have a couple questions for you as we wrap up. One of these is this, do you trust that Jesus is powerful enough to help you? Maybe that's where you are. Do you trust that he's powerful enough to help you? I don't care what it is you've done. Aaron, you don't know my past. It doesn't matter. He does. If this man who had thousands of demons in him was able to be rescued and saved, you're not too far gone. He is powerful enough to help you. And do you trust that Jesus is loving enough to help you? That he wants to use his power to serve his purpose, to free you and love you? And then do you trust that he's wise enough to know how to do it and when? Because it's not going to be the way you want most of the times. But do you trust that his way is better? Do you trust his wisdom? So ultimately what it boils down this morning to everyone, the ultimate question that you have to answer is, do you trust him? Maybe you've known Jesus for years, and there's still those areas of your life that you have anxiety and fear that you're holding on to for control. And he's saying, do you trust me with that part? Let that go. Trust me with it. Trust my ways. And maybe you're searching for who Jesus is. You're trying to weigh out, who is Jesus to me? Who is he really? And he's just saying, do you trust me with your life? Do you trust me with all of you to commit to me? That's a question we all need to answer. And the thing is he's proven that he can be trusted, because he came not to serve, but to be served, and to give his life a ransom for many. Philippians says he didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped and held on to, but he relinquished that to be born in flesh and bone, to be among his people, to take my sin and your sin on the cross. No greater love is this than a man who lays down his life for his friend, and that's what he did. How can you trust him? Because he has the power to defeat sin and death. He did that through his death and resurrection, but also we know he has the love to do so because he tasted death in my place and your place. That's how we can trust him. And so that's his plea for you this morning. Is if you don't know him, that today you put your faith and your trust in the one who came for you. Will you pray with me? Father, thank you so much for your grace and your mercy. Thank you just for this account that we have of seeing your power, your purpose, and your priorities, Lord, because it's a tough thing. We're all going through things in life that are scary. We all have different backgrounds, different circumstances, and we have moments where we're waiting. We're waiting for you to move, and it's not in the way that we want, and we get frustrated, and there's pain that comes with that. But Jesus,